Hey, it's Checkmate, and in the past week, I completed my first game jam. I ended up creating a turn-based battler where you roll dice and combine them to defeat enemies. Sound familiar? I've known about Brackeys for a while and have benefited from his resources when learning a bit about game development, and the game jams are pretty popular. I ran across the 2025 Game Jam about a month ago and decided I wanted to join, so I recruited a rogue portal girl for the art and we waited for the theme to be announced. For those of you who aren't familiar with game jams, you have a limited amount of time to fully make a video game and generally are required to use a specific theme or constraint. Brackeys Game Jam would be 7 days. Before the theme was announced, they opened a voting round. Rogue Portal Girl and I brainstormed potential game ideas for each theme. These were just a mechanic and a theme idea. The theme that won the vote, however, was Biscuit for the Biscuit, and once it won, we realized that our original idea, recreate the board game Risk with blackjack instead of dice, was not at all what we wanted to build. So we scrapped that idea and went with something new altogether. We settled on a Yahtzee Roguelite, where you defeat endless waves of enemies by scoring with Yahtzee dice. And to really nail the theme, we were going to have cute enemies that were cookies, or as our friends across the pond named them, Biscuits. The core gameplay loop felt pretty simple, and there was a lot of space to expand with upgrades, special dice, enemy effects, boss fights, if we had the time. Boy, were we ambitious on day one. I sketched out roughly what the UI could look like and then mocked it up with some simple rectangles and buttons. I'm actually pretty impressed with how well the initial design held up. This is pretty much where we took the game, and I think it worked out pretty well. On day 2, I cracked open some code and made some dice objects that were able to be dragged around and dropped on the screen with the mouse. I also coded in some logic that would allow the dice to exist anywhere on the dice board, but would otherwise be locked into scoring positions above. While it would have been funny to allow the dice to be placed anywhere on the screen, I thought that would end up being a nightmare later. I got those dice to have 6 separate faces that could be chosen at random when rolled. As a finishing touch, I made a reroll function when clicking on the UI area that would randomly move the dice to various positions on the dice board, and the dice that were locked in the scoring area would not be rerolled. Look, I got a Yahtzee! On day 3, we had some art and design work on the way. I wouldn't add it all to the game until later on, but it takes a long time to draw every single image that is needed for a game. We decided that the dice would be ingredients rather than numbers in order to make the connection to the theme stronger. I also worked on the code that would be able to calculate the scores when you lock the dice, so that way it would tell you if you would get points for scoring a full house or straight or something. I struggled to find an easily adaptable way to get the scores, but ultimately decided on using a match string. Each of the dice values would be assigned a position on the string. This way I could tell how many of each dice face value I had locked. This is actually one of the difficulties of a game jam. You're often forced to write ugly code and don't have time to find an elegant solution for every problem. But I was pretty happy with this one. At the end of the day, I had a basic game that would allow you to roll dice 3 times and then have 5 turns to reach 100 points. If you won or lost, the game over screen would be adjusted accordingly. I exported this out to itch and verified it would run in the browser, then dropped a ping to a couple of friends to have them test it out. On day 4, I was suddenly hit with the realization that we were over halfway through the time. Rogue Portal Girl and I hashed out a few of the remaining design questions that were introduced when we pivoted away from the classic dice to symbols. Namely, straights became harder to identify, and we needed to come up with a visual system to make the game a bit more intuitive in terms of how the scores worked. We ended up adding back the chance scoring method, which allows you to add up whatever dice you got, and simplify the straights to a single score method for 5 dice with all different symbols. The last part of the jam was just a complete blur. On Friday, I wrote up a crazy long to-do list to finish the basic systems, like spawning in new enemies, actually having a game over screen, and having the upcoming enemy preview work. I implemented in most of the art into the game and worked with Rogue Portal Girl on adjustments or missing assets. It was insane just fixing up one thing and then immediately moving on to the next task. Saturday was the final day, and I wrote a final checklist of everything we were going to include with a tiny bit of polish. If it didn't make this list, it was getting cut out, and I wasn't even sure if I would get the full list completed. For one thing, I'd done almost 0 testing, and there were some pretty bad bugs I knew about. I was just leaving them alone to fix at the very end. I had to redesign most of the UI to make it look a bit polished and more readable. I also decided to implement a round counter and include it as part of a scaling system. We implemented a couple enemy animations for idle and death to help add a bit of flair. And we reached out to 2 of our friends to record some sound effects we could use for things like clicking on menus and re-rolling dice. My favorite is definitely the one we used for the death animations. And then I made a funky little background track for some music. During this time, Rogue Portal Girl was setting up the itch webpage to look nice with screenshots and descriptions. Late into the night, I imported the final arts, smashed the really bad game-breaking bugs, added in the sound effects, replaced all the placeholder fonts, and actually implemented the pause button. As a final touch, I implemented the timer in the top right corner, in case anyone was wanting to speedrun or something, and then exported it out an hour and a half before the deadline. Our goal was to finish a game and submit it, but I'm actually pretty pleased with the result. There's a lot that can still be added. There were so many nice to haves that we cut because we absolutely did not have the time. You can play it in the browser or download it and play it on Windows. It's completely free, and I'd love it if you give it a try and let me know what you think in a comment. Link is in the description.